What did he say to do? Skip
Let's talk a little bit about these two articles. One of the things that, well, there's two things I wanted to capture here with these examples, and one of them is that both of them were published in the same journal, which is the International Journal of Science Education. You can see that this qualitative article was published in 2008, the other one 2003. And so they're both from the same journal. They both kind of come from the same place. They're both studying science education, but one of them has much more of a qualitative feel, the other one more of a quantitative feel. And I wanted you to get a sense of kind of how they look a little bit different. They're both very lengthy articles, and but they give us some idea. You know, when you finish your final research paper at the end of your student teaching, yours is going to be pretty lengthy too, because you're going to have a lot of stuff in there, some of which we'll work on during this year with you doing your literature review and so forth, but some of it just being able to present and describe the information that you have. So for these two tables here, you were looking at the qualitative report. As you flipped through it and looked at it, what kind of things did you notice? What did you see? Lots of words, right? Lots of words, okay?
Like dialogue that the kids had during class.
Can you give a page number or tell me where to find that?
In the 20s, the early 20s.
21.
There you go.
All right, so here we go. If you look at on page 21, you know, two students are working together, and they did not reach an agreement in their prediction. The disagreement was mediated through a discussion with the tutor, but they showed themselves to be unable to make an aware prediction. And then it takes us right through the dialogue of the students arguing with one another, the input that the tutor had, and this is quoted line for line, exactly what the students said in that conversation, okay? So for example, when I collected data by interviewing, I interviewed a lot of 8th graders. I would sit with them one-on-one. I had a list of questions to ask them. I had a tape recorder going, and as we're talking there, I'm taping the conversation. I transcribed the tapes, meaning that I typed up exactly what the students said, what I said, and I created these scripts, right? And then I'm looking for, see, these common themes. Oh, I noticed that of the 25 students I interviewed, 23 of them all said something like this. And so I could quote those students and say, here's what a typical student would say. And so as we actually get into those kinds of quotes, a lot of this study is focused on the reason there's a lot of words there is because you're just seeing a lot of dialogue going on that the reader can look through. And so, you know, again, you might want to think about yourself as the reader, the consumer of a research article. What do you like to read more? Some people like to read that kind of dialogue. You really get into the mind of the student. What are they thinking? What are they saying? And you get all of that detail. That's what a qualitative study will oftentimes do. Okay? Anything else about that study or things that you noticed? Okay, so that might be the highlight of it at this point. Okay, what about on the quantitative side? What did you see?
Graphs.
A lot of charts.
A lot of charts, a lot of graphs. Can you give me a page number on that for an example?
395. Well, 24 on the.
24.
It's like a graph on every page.
Yeah, almost.
Scroll down, you'll find it.
So this particular one is on teaching biology and the evolution of living beings. And so a lot of the study looks like that. Okay? So we've got a pre-test score, post-test score, how well they retain the data. We're presenting those in charts, and we're talking about the numbers themselves. So whereas this first article is, you get inundated with conversation and specifics of what people said, the other article was more about the numbers themselves and how did it stack up and what kind of things. We can see a lot of charts, a lot of bar graphs and so forth to describe. Qualitative study, quantitative study. Okay, see the difference? Very blatant when you start to look at this kind of a research piece. So you need to think to yourself about, you know, what am I actually trying to measure in my classroom, and how do I measure it best? Can I do that best through a lot of dialogue? Through, you know, we've had students collect information through journal writing, through videotaping what students are doing, and transcribing some of the things the students said in the video, interviewing, having students write essays, stuff like that. So you got a lot of words going on. Or you can take the route of doing pre-tests and post-tests or quizzes or whatever it is that's quantifiable. And you saw in the funny video we watched that you can even take some things that you wouldn't even think are quantifiable and put a number on them. You know, a student's attitude, how they're perceiving something in the classroom. Can I put a number on that from 1 to 5 in terms of their interest they're showing at any given time and be able to somehow quantify that. So sometimes we take these constructs that you can almost describe in words, but you can attach a number to them and use them as part of your data collection. But I wanted to just illustrate with those two how dramatically different, even though these articles are both about teaching secondary science, and they're both in the exact same journal, they have a very different flavor because of the qualitative versus the quantitative. Those are decisions you have to make. And also, when you're doing the research for your own writing, be ready to read ones that fall into either of the categories. In an ideal world, in an ideal world, we sort of base the decisions we make in our classroom on these three different things. This is actually a model that came from Alan Schoenfeld at Berkeley, and Schoenfeld talked about that every minute of every day in our classroom, we're making decisions about what we're going to do next with our group of students. And so the actions that we take in our classroom, those decisions that we make, are based on three different things, he says. One is, what is the goal? What are we trying to accomplish in our class? Another is what we believe about the content and about the students we teach. And the last one is our knowledge base. And so what Schoenfeld argued is if you want to become a better teacher, you've got to change at least one of those things, if not all three of them, because they interact from one another, with one another. So what we do is we try to change maybe our knowledge base by doing some research in our classroom, because if our knowledge of the content area and of our students changes, it will affect our decision making in the classroom. Okay? We talk a lot about that in pre-methods classes. By the way, that just reminds me, as an aside, those of you who are in AYA math, the 3400 class in the spring will be for math people only. Okay, and I'm teaching that class. It's on Monday afternoons from 1 to 2:15. Monday and Wednesday from 1 to 2:15. There will also be a special section for science only, but we don't know when that's going to be yet because it's in the proofing stages as we speak, but there is intended to be a science section. Middle childhood will take the general 3400 that everybody takes. There will not be a special section because we got pairs of, your math science, but people that are social studies, math, etc. So the middle childhood will be mixed, but there will be an AYA math section and an AYA science section. So keep an eye out for that. I'll let you know when we have the numbers and the schedules come out next week, but we know that we're going to do that a little differently this year. So that's exactly what we do, is we talk a lot about the art of teaching as decision making. This is a quote from Marzano, who's a kind of a big education person, researcher. It says, educational research is a key factor in enabling school administrators, principals, teachers, and parents to make decisions. And they talk about in your textbook that there are lots of ways that teachers make decisions in the classroom, and most of them aren't very good. For example, I had this personal experience once, right? Or somebody told me about what they did in their classroom, and that just drives what I do for the next 10 years. Just because it happened this way in my classroom yesterday doesn't mean that it's going to work that way for everybody all the time. And you hear that one story, that one personal experience that kind of drives everybody's teaching in a building. Or limited to one or two studies. I read this one study once 15 years ago that said this, and so therefore I've been doing this ever since. Okay, there may have been one study that showed that, but for every one study that shows this, there's probably 10 others that refute it with some other evidence. Why are you basing everything you do in your classroom on one study? Or a famous person, right? I heard this one speaker in a keynote in a conference, and she said this, and therefore I based my classroom on that ever since. Well, she may have said that, it may have been an interesting thing, but should I be hanging my entire classroom performance on that one comment one person made? And then there's the old folklore, right? We've always done it that way. Probably the biggest plague we have in schools. We've been doing it that way for 20 years. Why will we change it? Why will we do it any differently? That's the argument I've been fighting on the 3400 class for years. Why have we always done it that way? Why don't we have a 3400 for math people only and for science people only? Why are we doing it that way? Because we've done that for 20 years. Too bad. Let's do it different. And finally started to move that ship a little bit. And in fact, we're moving the ship on the middle childhood and the AYA program and getting both of them completely redesigned. But it's taken a while to get there because of fighting that attitude. The idea of magic bullets and flashy new packages. Somebody's always got this thing. If you do this, it will fix all of your problems in the classroom tomorrow. And they're willing to sell it to you literally to make a bundle off of it. A business model. Okay, this way of doing things works in the business world, so why wouldn't it work in education? Well, because the business world isn't completely applicable to the education world. We don't live in the same universe necessarily. And then, of course, our best choice here is looking at things with research-based theory and synthesis of peer-reviewed studies. As we've been looking at today, studies that were published someplace that have been reviewed by somebody and were published, and if we can look at a base of those and say we've got a number of studies that all support this way of doing things, that maybe that will support us in doing our teaching in a particular way. So unfortunately, a lot of these things up here drive what goes on in the classroom in so many cases, and so few of us actually engage right down here where we ought to be. And that's why the action program puts us in this category down here to make you the best researchers that we can before we put you out there in the field to be teachers. Questions? Okay. So where are we headed from here? The next class that we have is on October the 7th in a couple of weeks. And the class will focus on how you go about writing a literature review. Please make sure that you bring your laptops, iPads, and so forth with you. We're going to actually do some researching on the internet that day as part of the session from 4:30 to 5:50. And I'd like for you to read in your textbook chapters 4 and 5. There are about 30 pages there, 29 pages, and it gets into the idea of a literature review and how that's put together. Please make sure you've read that for our class. We have today's PowerPoint and handouts posted at Canvas. And would you please make sure that you are made contact with your project advisor in the next section. If you haven't talked lately, I don't know where you are in that process. Everybody's in kind of a different place. But if you haven't talked to them lately, at least touch base. Let them know that we met today. We're meeting again in 2 weeks. Keep them in the loop. You're not required to meet with them between now and then, but if you haven't talked lately, it would be a good time to do that, just to touch base on where things are at. Okay. Questions? All right, great. Have a good week. All right.